Today, people who actually survived these tragic situations are here to talk about the miracles that kept them alive. Take a look at this news footage. Now, 10 people died in this plane crash. My first guest, Alan, is one of the survivors. This happened 5 months ago, and he hasn't gotten on a plane since then, until he flew in to be on the show today, because that's a long walk, right?
That's right.
How was your trip?
It was pretty good. It was not nearly as frightening to get on the plane as I thought it was going to be. I did a lot of praying before we got on, and we had the normal turbulence that has to accompany every flight, and that was a little frightening. But we made it okay, and I had my wife with me. You guys were kind enough to bring her too.
Were you white-knuckled the whole?
For a few minutes, just for a few minutes.
Take me through the events that happened last summer.
Yeah. So last August 21st, I had a commuter plane flight from Atlanta, Georgia to Gulfport, Mississippi. I got on the plane, and the takeoff and the beginning of the flight was just as normal and uneventful as any other flight I'd ever been on. I was reading the newspaper. The guy next to me fell asleep. The flight attendant was passing out the complimentary drinks going down the aisle. And about 15 minutes into the flight, there was this tremendous explosive noise, a huge bang. And it felt as if the plane had run into something, and we swerved to the left really hard and dipped down very sharply. And my first thought instantly was, I'm going to see Jesus today. That was the first thought I had.
Really?
It was. And it didn't last very long. My next thought, after the pilot straightened it out after just a couple of seconds, was, what on earth happened? And I looked up and noticed people were looking out the windows on the left side of the plane, and I could see that the propeller wasn't spinning anymore. Actually, I didn't know it had actually become detached and lodged in the wing. And the housing was ripped off the engine, and fluid was spraying all over the wing itself. And so that was a pretty frightening sight to see.
So was this a big plane with a lot of people in it?
It was a commuter plane that had 29 people, including the flight crew.
All right, so when you saw that the propeller was off, you must have said, what's going on here? What did they tell you? I
was worried that something serious was wrong. Obviously, it was. The flight attendant made an announcement that we'd lost an engine and that we were declaring an emergency landing. We're going to turn the plane around and head back to Atlanta. And I think every one of us on the plane was concerned. I was certainly very concerned, but the flight attendant was very calm and very professional, and we all looked to her for leadership, and I believe because of that, there was no panic or there was no sobbing or anything like that on the plane. We all knew that we were in a very grave situation, but she kept everything under control. She went through the emergency procedures, the same procedures that she'd gone over when the plane took off, except we listened to her the second time that she did.
You never listened on the first one.
That's right. And then she said something that was probably the most frightening thing I heard while the plane was in the air. She said she'd like for us to take our drinks, the drinks that we hadn't finished yet, she'd just given to us, and place them into the seat back pocket in front of us, or pour them into the seat back pocket. And I've flown a lot of times, and I know that when you have bad turbulence or a problem, the flight attendant has to collect the drinks quickly. They come through the aisle with a big garbage bag, and you just toss them in. And I thought if she didn't have time to do that, and she wasn't worried about cleaning up the huge mess and the stains it was going to cause, I thought, oh, we must be in terrible, terrible trouble here, and the situation must be much worse than what she's indicating to us. And so when I realized then in my head that we were probably going to crash, then I began to pray in earnest at that point. And I'm a Christian, and I knew that if I died, I'd go to heaven, and I told the Lord that I was ready to go home, that I was ready to see Jesus that day. And but then I asked God for a few favors, because the one thing...
You're making a
few
deal!
Favors, I was. The one thing I was afraid of was the pain that might accompany a plane crash.
Sure.
And so I prayed that God would just kill me quickly and that I wouldn't feel very much pain. And I prayed that I have 4 young children, and all of them know how much I love them right now. But I prayed that as they grew older, that God would help them to remember just how much that I love them. And I prayed that my wife would have the strength to raise 4 young children by herself.
Surely.
And we didn't have a whole lot of time to spend thinking about what was happening, because the flight attendant was keeping us occupied with the emergency procedures. Then she went over the crash landing position.
So did the plane crash?
It did. 9.5 minutes after the explosion occurred, we lost altitude and we could not make it to an airport in time. And we began to go through a row of trees on the edge of a hayfield.
What did that feel like? Like you in the movies where you see bumpity, bumpity, bump?
It did. We landed very hard on the ground. The wing broke off first, and the belly of the plane slammed on the ground. And I was just holding on tight to that seat back, and I wasn't watching, but I could feel the bumping and the turning of the plane. The plane broke into pieces. The fuselage broke in half, and the piece of the fuselage I was in twisted on its side. So the left side came up in the air, and the right side was down. I was on a window seat, and my window was sliding along the ground, and the people and the seats and the luggage from the left side began to fall on top of us. And I didn't really feel much pain. I felt things hitting me, but I didn't really feel much pain at that point. I didn't realize I'd broken some bones and things like that. But the plane came to a stop, and there was a pile of people on top of me. So I eventually got my seatbelt unfastened, and I tried to get out of the plane. And there was a line of people to get out, and they weren't moving because nobody wanted to jump into the fire. So I turned around and I began to yell at the people in front of me, you have to go through the fire, go, 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 go. And so they all started to leap through the fire. And I assumed that I leaped also, but I don't remember. That's one piece of the event that I don't have a memory of yet. The next thing I know, I was rolling on the ground outside the plane.
To put the fire out in you?
Well, somehow I didn't catch on fire. When I stood up, the grass was on fire for about 50 to 100 feet in every direction, and the people were all on fire. I could see 6 or 7 people that were either laying in the ground or standing up, and they were all just completely engulfed in flames from their heads to their feet.
How many people died in that crash?
10 have died. There were only 2 people died at the site, but 8 more people have died of their burns since the crash.
You say that you think this plane crash is your own personal miracle. Why?
I do. Well, there's really no reason for me to be here and not those people. I'm not any different or better or worse. For whatever reason, God selected me to survive this event. And I know before the crash, my priorities were my faith, my family, and my job, and they were all bunched together. And now they're basically in the same order, but they're very far apart. And I realize how important life is, how precious life is, and I savor every moment with my children. And I definitely accept this as a personal miracle for myself.
I think that making it alive through a serious accident is always miraculous, but not everyone walks away unscathed. Sherry was a Playboy centerfold, and then her life was shattered when she was in a terrible car accident, certainly something I should know a lot about. She broke her back and was paralyzed from the chest down?
T9 down.
T9 down. I understand that you were on the side of the road for 8 hours. How could that be? I don't quite understand that, Sherry.
I'll start at the beginning. I was on my way home from work. I came into a thick pocket of fog, and before there had been no fog. And there was 3 deer trying to cross the road. And the only thing I could do was swerve the other way. So I ended up on the left side of the road in loose gravel, which caused my car to roll. So it was a front end to rear end roll at about 60 miles an hour. And they estimate I rolled 50 yards. So they said at least 3 times, possibly 4 times, I flipped my car at 60 miles an hour. In a rollover accident, you're bounced from the seat to the steering wheel to the door, depending on where you're at. Luckily, I was the only person in the vehicle. I don't know exactly at what point I broke my back, but I'm sure it was in the first roll.
Did you hear it?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I felt the bones crack, and I heard it crack. It was excruciatingly painful, and it knocked the wind out of me. And the only thing I could do was drape over the steering wheel. At the time of the break, when I heard it, I also heard a loud, like a bell or a gong in my head, and at the same time it was almost like lightning, neon lights inside my head that went off. So I just held onto the steering wheel and was still being bounced around until the car came to a stop on its wheels.
Were you then conscious when the car came to a stop?
Yeah, I was conscious. And I could smell gas, and I knew that my back was broken. I tried to move my legs, and I couldn't move. I could move my arms fine and my head and my neck, and I knew I needed medical assistance. I needed the emergency team immediately. And I was afraid that the vehicle would ignite. And
Yes.
I knew that I needed to have time to be able to get out and to get away before the possibility of the car igniting. And so the only thing I could do, because I couldn't get the door open, the only thing I could do was slide the seat back, hang onto the steering wheel, and luckily the driver's window I had busted out with my head. So I put my left arm up into the door and hung onto the steering wheel, and I drug myself out until I got to my waist, and I was bent over the door. And I could get my hands down into the blackberry briars and the bushes on the ground, and I pulled myself out until I dropped onto the ground. And I'm sure that's when I did the severe damage to my spinal cord, which has rendered me permanently paralyzed. I had to get away from the vehicle, so I literally belly crawled. I hung onto the bushes and the briars, and I crawled, pulling myself with my arms as far as I could go. And when I feel that I could go no farther, I started yelling for help. And the fog was very thick. Every time a car would go by, I could hear it, but I couldn't see the lights at all. And so I didn't know which way to go. And I kept, saying, God, don't let me die like this. Don't let me die here like this. And I was afraid because I was alone, and I know no one had seen me.
Of course.
And I have 2 small children. My son's almost 7, and I have a 5-year-old daughter. And I told God that he'd have hell to pay if I died and left my children.
He said thank you, and you threatened.
I think he had St. Peter lock the gates and was screaming, "Don't let her in."
No.
So anyway, I was loudly, out loud, screaming, "Don't let me die, don't let me leave my children." And they don't let me leave them without their mother. And I just kept dragging myself across the ground. And they said that I had probably been disoriented and in shock, and I had crawled completely around the car and then ended up going the other way. And I did end up about 10 feet from the road.
Now, how long were you there before they found you?
All night. My wreck happened between 1 and 2 a.m., and I was found after 6:30 in the morning, between 6:30 and 7 in the morning, by my neighbor boy, Jeff Hubbard. He went by and saw the vehicle. While I'm laying there and it's daylight, my husband and my children drove by, and I was waving and screaming for help, and they drove by.
And didn't see you.
Yeah, and luckily Jeff did. He drove by and saw the car, and he thought I'd just run off the road in the fog and then I was home fine. And for some reason, he just felt that he had to go back. And he turned around and he came back, and I heard him pull over and get out of the vehicle. And eventually the Toutle Volunteer Fire Department showed up, and then the paramedics. And when they cut my clothes off of me, there was a basketball-sized lump in my back. And then immediately they yelled, "Life flight, life flight, we've got a life flighter out." And it had been 32 degrees that night.
Ooh.
And I'd laid there all night long, and my body temperature was below 83 degrees. At 79 degrees is when you're clinically dead. Everything stops.
Sure.
They said another 20 minutes or a few more degrees, and I would have died. But they said the only thing that kept me alive was the hypothermia, otherwise I would have bled to death.
Is there a difference in the way you were treated as a Playboy centerfold and the way you're treated now that you're in a wheelchair?
I feel so, because now people look at me as a woman in a wheelchair. They don't want to ask questions, and they're not quite sure why I'm here. I get a lot of looks, and I can tell they're wondering, what does she have? What does she have? Because they go as far away from me as they possibly can, like I have something contagious.
Really?
You know, and I just feel like grabbing them and screaming, if you're stupid enough to drive too fast for the road conditions, that's the only way you're going to end up like me.
Right.
You know, because I was wearing my seatbelt.
It's interesting because what I'm learning from that is I think that I'm good. I don't purposely go around someone in a wheelchair. I hope I don't.
There's a lot of people that really do. I've had
They
people
really do.
step across me, literally step over the top of me. I've had people in shopping malls take the back of my chair and move me out of their way.
Unbelievable. Well, that's the lesson for us. Next, you saw the horrible pictures on TV. Now you're going to hear how one man survived what should have been a fatal fall in the Oklahoma City bombing. Plus, this 7-year-old was lost in the woods for 20 hours in freezing temperature. How did he survive? Amazing stories when we return. Stay with us. You told that very well. That's why we ask everyone, what does it mean? Certain events stand out in our minds forever. Do you remember where you were when you heard about the Oklahoma City bombing? Well, my next guest, Michael, will never forget where he was and that day. 169 people died in that tragedy. Michael's father was one of the unfortunate ones who didn't make it out alive. Michael survived. Where was he? He was in that building. Michael, tell us what happened to you that day.
It was just a normal day.
Did you work in that building?
Yes. I was sitting at my desk. I had just gotten off the phone, and the lights went out.
How long have you been at work?
2 hours.
Okay.
And the lights went out, and my first thought was, this is odd. I've worked here 7 years, and the power's never gone off. So that was strange, and then I started hearing a rumbling, and at first I thought it was an earthquake. And I heard a woman go, "Oh," and then I heard more rumbling. And I thought, well, it's an earthquake, I better get under my desk. So I went to dive under my desk, but there wasn't a floor, and I was in a free fall.
By trying to go onto the floor under your desk, there was no floor,
There
and
was
you went
no floor.
down. How many stories?
4 floors.
4 floors.
And I was in a dive, and looking below me, I saw what looked like concrete rubble falling about a floor below me, but it was kind of bright, which I thought was odd since there was no power. And something must have hit me on the head right here. I've got a pretty good scar, and my glasses flew off. And my thought was, this isn't real, this isn't real, this isn't real. I don't want to die, don't want to die, don't want to die. And I knew, well, I figured I was going to fall 7 floors since I was on the 7th floor, and I would hit, and that'd be the end of it. And I thought, I can't die. I was just thinking about my dad getting older. I could start to see it in his face. He was 55. And I thought, I'm going to have to take care of them in 10 or 20 years. I can't die. And I thought, well, if the fall doesn't kill me, then certainly my desk or a piece of the rubble would kill me.
Is that an actual piece?
This is an actual piece. I'm sure this is enough to kill anyone if it falls on you from 7 floors out.
I would think. What happened after you landed?
Well, I was about knee to waist deep in garbage, and my arm was up like this. I was tangled in some metal wall supports, and I was in the 3rd floor office of some people. I recognized the people, and one of the men said, "Is everyone all right?" And I said, "Help me." And he said, "Where did you come from?" I said, "The 7th floor." And he said, "Oh my God." So they had to clear a path to get to me. Then they leaned me against a bookcase, and then they had to clear a path for all of us to get out.
You say, Michael, your father worked in the same building?
Right.
You said you didn't realize that your father had died in the bombing until much later, but that you think he had a lot to do with the fact you survived.
Okay.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, the reason we had a lot of hope that he was still alive because he could have been anywhere in the building. As it turns out, he was at his desk, and if we had known for sure he was at his desk, we would have known he would have not made it because he ended up being in what they call the pancake area. But now that I know he probably died instantly, I think he tried to pull a few strings with St. Peter and get them to help me out because I have to look out for my mom and my sister. And
Another negotiator.
well,
I think maybe he did. Your net result, you say your experience has changed your life. What do you mean by that?
well, I don't necessarily feel safe
Anywhere.
anywhere. I was having breakfast in the hotel room this morning on the 12th floor, and for a brief instant I thought, well, this whole hotel could collapse.
I want you to meet Kristen. She says that her 7-year-old son, Chris, is a miracle survivor because he was recently lost in the woods for 20 hours overnight in freezing temperatures. She says she's amazed that Chris is still alive today because he's had other narrow brushes with death ever since he was a baby. Now, before we bring him out, he's 7 years old. Let's find out what kind of kid Mom has been worrying about. Kristen, what was the first miracle survival that he experienced?
The first one was when he was a week before he was 1. He had a fever of 105, and I took him to the doctor. And while he was at the doctor's office, he had a seizure from the fever. And the doctor ordered an injection for the seizure and gave him the wrong medication. So basically I sat there for about 45 minutes, and they realized what they had done, and we watched him die until we sat there until he turned blue and his body function stopped. They revived him.
You say that not even a year later, Chris had another call. What happened the second time or the third time?
Right. Well, you think you've had one thing happen, you're free
That's
and
enough,
clear,
yes.
and it's not going to happen again. Well, he was at a daycare center, and I got a call from the daycare provider.
Take it easy.
And she just told me that he was sick and he was okay, but she just wanted to let me know. And
Go ahead.
when I got there, I saw him on the couch, and I went over and picked him up and I pinched him, and he didn't respond at all. So I got him to the hospital. I knew we didn't have time for an ambulance, so somebody drove me. And while we were at the hospital, we live in a real rural town, and they thought maybe he had an aneurysm rupture in his brain, and he was brain dead.
Hearing that, can you imagine?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. But they transferred him to another hospital, and in the meantime, they received the test results from his blood work and realized he had taken some medication. And come to find out, he had somehow found another child's medication and taken a large amount of it.
The medicine wasn't being monitored by the daycare? Well,
No.
all right, hold on to that. Now, recently, Chris was lost in the woods, and we have a piece of the 911 call that you made when you realized he was missing. Let's hear some of that.
911, the nature of your emergency.
My son is lost in the woods. He's only 7.
Okay, what were you doing? Were you walking up there?
I just came up here to pick him up, and he's been out in the woods lost for a while. And the people that he was staying with, he was out in the woods with another little boy, and they can't find him.
Okay, is someone up there now still looking for him?
There's people out looking for him.
Wow, were you calm?
Well, it had only been 45 minutes, but I immediately panic when anything happens with him now. I mean,
I think it's time we heard from 7-year-old Chris. We're going to ask him what happened, his latest miracle. Chris, will you come on out to see us? Hi, Chris. I'm not used to interviewing such handsome young men. Are you 7?
Yes.
Okay. I know that a few weeks ago you were lost in the woods.
Yes.
Can you tell me what happened?
From the beginning or the ending?
Well, whatever you'd like to tell me. How did you happen to get lost in the woods in the first place?
Me and my friend were looking for this dog's home, and I left the bike just one place, and I said, I'm going home no matter what. And then I went the wrong way, and he went the right way. And so that's how I got lost.
Did you know you were lost?
Once I jumped over like 5 fences.
Then you knew you were lost? What did you decide to do when you knew you were lost? What were you worried about?
Bears.
We have bears.
You do?
There's a lot
Thank
of.
heavens.
Our town has a somewhat of a bear
A
problem.
bear
So,
problem.
yeah.
So you thought the bear was going to get you, Chris? What did you do to keep the bear from getting you?
Well, I took my green coat and I put it over me so I could be camouflaged and they would think it's just a book or, I'm not a book, but a bush or something.
And did you lie very still?
Yeah, I said, Chris, don't move, don't move, don't move. Dang, you moved!
Were you worried that you would miss Christmas?
Yes, a lot.
Why?
I wouldn't get any presents under the tree, but plus, this year I got more presents.
So he was gone how long, Mom?
Well, the night that I called, it was about 5:15 p.m., and it was dark. That's why I panicked. And by the next morning, I was really panicked. I mean, it was pretty bad when quite a few, the night's over and your child's still not home.
Did they find him?
Eventually, that afternoon, about 1:30, we got a phone call saying that he was home. He had made his way to the highway. And the Highway 101, we don't even know for sure. And a passing motorist pulled up to him and said, little boy, it's not safe to be out here on the road. And he had lost a boot and was completely wet. He had gone through the river.
What is it like to have a child as lucky as Chris? You are a miracle kid, you know.
He is.
Certainly.
I keep wondering, and people ask us why these things happen to him over and over. And the only thing we can figure out is it's happened to him because he's managed to survive everything. And if it was another child, maybe they wouldn't have made it.
That's interesting. Next, this man says he survived being run over by a train in a truck. He was dragged several hundred yards. His whole life has changed because of his miracle survival. His story next. We've been talking with people who've beaten the odds. They've survived incredible circumstances. Meet Richard. He was on his way to work one day, and the truck stalled in front of an oncoming train. Is that everyone's worst nightmare who drives? The truck was dragged down the track several hundred yards, and he was thrown from the vehicle. Richard, we've spoken to others about moments before they thought they were about to die. Did any of that happen to you?
Yes, ma'am, it did.
What were you doing on the tracks when the car stalled?
The first thought through my mind was, I got to get off of here, because I had 2 other boys with me. And the next thing I heard was the man on the passenger side hollering, there's the train. I turned and looked and saw a great big white light and the engineer waving, get out of the way. At that time, everything I'd ever done good, everything I'd ever done bad flashed before my eyes.
Really?
And I thought of my children. I remember the time then I slammed the truck in first gear and it lunged forward and the train hit right behind my head. Left the bed on the roadway and dragged the cab on up the railroad tracks where it threw 3 of us out. I woke up on the railroad tracks, and I heard a boy hollering, "My back hurts." And I told the police officer there was nothing wrong with me, and she told me I was the worst one of all. And I looked over there, and there was one foot. And I looked over here, and there was the other one where they were broke back behind me. And I reached down, and both my legs were swollen up like basketballs. And then I knew then I was in trouble. When I was younger, I was on an ambulance crew, and I knew that shock would kill me, so I regulated my breathing, and I remained calm. And I kept myself awake until I got to the hospital.
You said you died 3 times during that accident and the aftermath.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me about that.
The first time was when a train hit us. I blacked out. Next thing I knew, it was like I was hovering above the whole crowd. I could see the train down below. I could see people laying out in the field. I could see the ambulance crew. I could see everybody working. And then it was like I just zapped back into my body. Well, they took me to Carolina Medical Center in Charlotte, and the doc put me in the operating room, and the doctor told me I was going to have all these people around me, not to freak out. And the next thing I remember is floating in this room with real bright light, brighter than the sun ever was, brighter than any welding arc. It was the most comfortable, relaxed feeling that I've ever felt. 5 years ago, I was scared to die. I'm not scared to die tomorrow.
You say you still have trouble dealing with the accident. Do you have nightmares?
Yes, ma'am, I do. I have severe nightmares. I wake up in a cold sweat.
Do you have guilt about it?
I feel guilty, yes. One of the boys suffered severe brain damage, and he's in Boone, North Carolina right now.
I understand that.
And I feel like I'm responsible for the way he's turned out.
Even though the car stalled.
Even though I wasn't the cause of the accident, I feel like I'm responsible for what's happened to him.
Do you feel, what were you like before this accident? Has it changed you?
You really want to know?
Yeah.
I was a drug abuser. Probably the worst one you'd ever see. I had a bad cocaine problem, which I lost my wife and children over. And I think the accident was God's way of telling me to open my eyes. You're not getting another chance. And I have changed my life 180 degrees.
Next, if you've ever wondered what makes a person want to jump out of an airplane for fun, listen to this. You're going to meet a man who fell 7,500 feet because the parachute didn't work. You won't believe the reason he thinks he lived. Stay with us. We're talking today with people who consider themselves miracle survivors, and I think those of us in this audience at least agree. They've been through plane crashes, car crashes, bombings, and they've survived tremendous odds and lived to tell the story. The next story is one of the most incredible tales of luck I've ever heard. This is Jerry. Jerry jumped out of a plane at 7,500 feet, and his parachute didn't open. You mean to say that you're sitting here today after jumping out of a plane 7,500 feet?
Yes, I am. Thanks to God, I guess. It was just a normal day, and I had been jumping about 4 years at that particular time, and it was just a Sunday afternoon, just every day to go out and jump just to practice, and my first parachute malfunctioned. I then pulled my reserve parachute, and it came out, and it malfunctioned also. It wrapped around the main parachute and tangled round and round and round, straight in both.
Had you ever had one of the parachutes malfunction before?
No, that was my first time. I had been jumping so long, I was confident, I guess. This will never happen to me, as everybody says.
I've never heard of 2 parachutes malfunctioning. What went through your mind when you knew that there was no parachute and you were going plummeting to Earth?
Well,
about 90 miles an hour, I would assume.
They figured 85 to 90. I was thinking at first I could fix it, and all I could think about then, I was engaged to get married, and fixing to get out of the Army, and now I was going to die. But I really wasn't afraid. I was really just, angry with myself. But I had really tried to fix everything, and, and
you just got angry.
Because I was fixing to die, I guess, and I should have cut the first parachute away, like I've trained people before and have been trained.
You didn't
but
listen
I wouldn't.
to your... When you hit, what did that feel like?
I don't really remember hitting the ground.
You do not?
I remember something vaguely going black.
And that was it.
that was
When
it.
you said you probably did something that saved your life, what did you do?
Well, when I was falling, when I knew I was going to hit, I just cocked my head back and I just watched the parachutes just flop back and forth. You know, I just went limp, I guess. You know, I was relaxed when I hit the ground, which the doctor said that's probably what saved my life.
You said you'd never jump again. 25 years later, you were 50 years old. You jumped. Why in heaven's name did you do that?
At my 50th birthday, and I thought, you know, I got to do something special. And I got a friend of mine in Greenville, South Carolina, that used to be my pilot back then. He was still jumping, and we got talking. One thing led to another, and he said something about jumping. And I thought that'd be the perfect thing to do on my 50th birthday. And I felt the odds were on my side, and the chance of me getting hurt again was slim to none.
Let's find out what kind of effect surviving an accident like this can have on a person permanently when we return. We're talking with people who've survived incredible circumstances. Some of them came away with physical injuries. Others have not been so lucky, minor physical injuries. Others have not been so lucky. All of them have been, in one way or another, psychologically affected by their experiences. And here to help us get a better understanding about what our guests have gone through is psychotherapist Catherine Janis. Welcome back to the program, Catherine.
Thank you.
Tell us, what are the typical reactions for a person to have after going through an incredible situation like that?
Well,
Congratulations on, you've changed your name,
yes,
you've gotten
I got married in September.
Right, in
Thank
case
you.
any of you recognize her from other shows, it's not the same name. Okay. What makes, what's the difference? What do they go through?
Well, they experience a tremendous loss, and what they lose is a sense of safety in the world, that the world is a safe place and they are safe in it. Actually, what they've lost is an illusion anyway, which we all walk around in a little bubble thinking we're safe and that harm isn't going to touch us and that that's going to happen to the other guy. So that's a very powerful loss, and it takes time to deal with that. What also happens on the positive side, what can happen is that they can get something from this. And that is firsthand knowledge that life is precious, that there are priorities in life, that some things are important and some things are not so important. And all of a sudden, things can come into focus for people like this.
Which is what happened with our last guest.
That's right. That's
Absolutely.
right. And I think happened for all these people, you know, that they have a sudden realization that someone can be taken from me or I can lose my life.
We'll be right back. You know, after we did that show, I realized I could not do a Miracle Survivor show without including my own personal miracle. Now, you may remember that my son JJ was in a terrible car accident. That's 4 years to this day, and we didn't know if he would live, let alone walk again. He was in a coma for 10 days, and after 5 months of rehabilitation, he was able to walk onto the show. That was one of the happiest moments of my life. Would you please welcome my son, JJ? Four years later, JJ is now a happy, healthy young man who has really survived an incredible ordeal. It's my pleasure to welcome again my son, JJ. Come on in here, JJ. What have you been doing since the accident?
Oh, gotten back into school.
That's great. Tell me how it changed your life.
Definitely have a new appreciation for everything that I did.
I would think so. I'm thrilled for all my guests on this show today. They're not only survivors, but fighters as well. Keep it up. How fragile life is, and that was the message. And I want to thank these nice people for, if they've made us one little second more aware of that, and they've done us indeed a good turn.
That's right.
Thanks and good luck to all of you. See you next time.